Welcome to today's webinar where we'll be discussing the London mayoral election on the 6th of May. Now, often in elections, it's a question of voting for the one you don't want the least or you least want the most, you know what I mean. But having met Shaun Bailey several times, you know what, he's all right. He's a Conservative politician like no other, a product of his background and his upbringing. Shaun is able to bridge a wide gap between classes in our society. And this is part of what makes him a credible candidate for this election and someone who could lead London out of this pandemic. But today's event is not going to be a fluff piece. You can get involved and you can ask any question you would like to, but I would ask, please keep it concise. A short question is a happy question. And please stay focused on today's topic, which is the election. It's less than 2 months away now. If you ask Nick Candy for his views on house prices, you may be ignored and we may even digitally remove you from the room at the push of a button. So let's keep it political, and I'll try to keep it light-hearted so we can all enjoy the event, grab a cup of tea, sit down. But I can tell you now, this election is serious business and London needs leadership like no other time in recent history. Crime is up and the police stations have all moved online. Now, when you need to report a crime, it's often a question of calling a phone number, which is answered by a recording, which directs you to a form on a website, only to eventually receive an email advising you that nothing can be done. Council taxes on the up, transport budgets need a reset. There's cycle lanes everywhere. Cycle lanes are obviously a good thing, but you can have too much of a good thing. Perhaps that's something that someone at City Hall did not realise. There's a lot to talk about, and Shaun is going to share with you his vision for London, and you can ask him how he intends to fight the crime and how he intends to support businesses to encourage growth, job creation, tax revenues, and ultimately a prosperous capital for our nation. This is your chance to spend some time with Shaun, get to know him a little and find out what he's all about. So I'm just going to talk you through the slides and the function. This is where you can use the Q&A down at the bottom. The chat is disabled at the moment, but if you do want to engage with other people on today's webinar, use the LinkedIn URL that we've posted and connect with each other on the LinkedIn post that we've set up for you. As I said, keep your questions political, keep them on point. Shaun is here to win this election. It's less than 2 months away now. We've got some really interesting points to share with you. Paul Scully, the Minister for London, is going to open with some comments. Then Shaun Bailey, introduction. Nick Candy with some supporting remarks. Ben Mellett is going to produce some data. I've seen some of this data before. It's very insightful. I think you're going to be very impressed. It's a really good opportunity to see what's involved behind the scenes in an election campaign. And I was quite impressed when I saw this last month. And then Q&A from you, our guest today. And as I said, you can ask anything you want. Shaun's probably been asked all these questions before, and you're welcome to ask anything that you'd like. And then Nick Candy is going to wrap up at the end. Hi, I hope you're enjoying the free content. My name is Matt Siddell. I started Qandor in 2017. In 2020, we launched a property academy called Tropolis. If you want to know how you can come and join our fantastic network and work with the wonderful people that we help and support, then click the link below and book your call with me today. So if I could switch to Paul Scully so that he can get the show going. Paul, welcome to the event.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm Paul Scully. I'm the Minister for London. I'm also a business minister. So sorry about this backdrop, which doesn't have any spectacular books on it because I'm rushing in between before I go and do some legislation in Parliament. But I'm more than happy to stop in rushing between sessions, not just because Shaun is a great bloke and will make a fantastic mayor, an effective mayor, which I'll speak a little bit more about in a second, but because I'm a Londoner. I want someone who can actually lead our great capital city in normal times and in these extraordinary times as well. The question you've asked is, what are you actually, is it time for change in City Hall? Absolutely it is. You want someone that is strategic, that can take that overarching view, that can make the most of government, that can work with the local authorities, work with business, including all of the guys on the call here today, that can relate to people and bring everybody their convening power, but also have the stewardship as well of making sure that you can make the finances of London work. And no, we can see that absolutely failing at the moment with TfL's finances. The government are having to come in again for the fourth bailout. And now clearly COVID has a massive effect on transport, but there was a fundamental problem there before. And as Shaun, I know, will tell you, we in government are prepared to pay the cost of COVID for our London transport, we are not prepared to pay the cost of Khan. And so those underlying issues are really symptomatic of the problem that we have in London at the moment. So in normal times, we want someone that can tackle crime, that can tackle housing, that can tackle transport and air quality and make London what it is. But at the moment, we are, and I was really glad to hear, Matt, at the beginning that you were talking about Shaun's drive to get more investment and get businesses up and running again, because we have a real pivotal moment. I share the Prime Minister's optimism that London will bounce back, as it's done time and time again since Dick Whittington was a boy. But we can't just allow that to happen by chance. We need to shape that change. We need someone in City Hall who can drive that, and Shaun is very much your man. We have Sadiq Khan at the moment, who does sit there and just point the finger at other people, usually government. I will sit there on meetings with him when he will explain how collaboratively we are working together, and often we do work where we need to work together. But I know he's usually sitting on an email or a letter that he's going to be sending to government via the press. And so it just becomes really difficult to have that collaboration, to have that strategic team working in that kind of situation. So I'm looking forward to working with Shaun to reopen London, to not just reopen London and give people the confidence and the joy of enjoying what we have in the centre of town, but also recovering as well. Beyond that, building the resilience for our economy. These are all areas that will help London get not just to the next stage, but back on its where it belongs as the world's greatest city. So Shaun, really looking forward to what you have to say and working with you to get you in City Hall. Thank you,
Paul. Thank you for joining us. I know you're short on time today, and really, I think you're only just popping in. I think you've got to go now. But yeah, we've got only an hour to spend together today, so I'm going to crack straight on with it. I'm going to welcome Shaun to the event. Shaun, thanks for joining us. What have you got to say for yourself? How are you going to win this election?
Firstly, let me say good afternoon to everyone. It's great to see you here. I really look forward to answering your questions. I'm going to try to keep my opening comments to very short, because we've all heard people in politics talk too much. I want to answer your questions. I think that's far more relevant. Let me just say this. For the last 5 years, London has been moving in the wrong direction. You know this. Transport is more expensive, homes haven't built, and crime is at epidemic levels. I have a 10-point plan to give London a fresh start, to push London in the correct direction. Because let's get this straight. We are one of the preeminent cities in the entire world. We'll only stay that way if we work. Remember, London has worked for 1,500 years, and it's all been about wealth creation. It's all been about entrepreneurs, and that's how we've raised the money to run the systems we need, to make it the best place to start and grow a business, and of course, to raise our families. If we want to continue to do that, we need leadership at City Hall. So when I get in City Hall, there's an important concept I want you to hold on to. City Hall will be where you come to have your problems solved. It won't be the City Hall that we currently have that is the problem. Anything from poor planning decisions right up to running TfL's finances into the ground. So let me start by telling you the top 3 things, and through the course of the questions, we'll come out with all the other measures I intend to enlist as we go through the process. So firstly, let's get crime down. I'm talking about 8,000 extra police officers in London by making a long-term savings in City Hall so we can invest it in the police service. And most importantly, a mayor who politically backs the police. We can't just arrest our way out of this crime crisis we're in. So I'll be providing 32 youth zones and 4,000 youth workers so that young people in London have the support they need to develop the soft skills to be successful, and also to help them stay away from crime. I was a youth worker for over 20 years, and one of my biggest successes was getting people out of crime and onto positive futures training, etc. Also, I create a second chance fund to help those slightly older people who are anywhere from sort of 16 plus to get the right training so they can go into the job market and get work. The second thing is to rebuild TfL's finances, and there's 2 major steps there. One is to start a sponsorship scheme so that we can keep free under 18s travel and free over 60s travel. I think the sponsorship scheme will make significantly more money than we need to do those things, but I'm being cautious and modest, so any extra money that we have, we can then invest into TfL to improving the services. And the other big thing is to start a London infrastructure bank. It's the same sort of model that the KfW Bank in Germany used to rebuild the German economy after the Second World War. I will take money from mayoral sale and business rates receipts, and then go to the markets, go to the capital markets, and get, I think we can get in the region of £10.9 billion, so that we can maintain the network of transport for London. We can develop the network, and we can add to the network as well. And the best thing about this tactic is all of the assets remain in public ownership, but it does mean we can develop the infrastructure that London will need moving forward. The TfL will be the recipient of most of the money, not all of it, but most of it, but all the assets will remain in public hands. And of course, it's about getting our economy going. I've been saying all along, the current mayor's glee in which he locked down London, I've always slightly pushed back upon, because I know the real only thing that business needs are customers. When we look at what's gone on with London, when we look at furlough has been a lifesaver for many people, but it is no substitute for customers. So what I'll be doing is have a high street fund, some £9 million, to develop our high streets to bring people into London. I'll run a Festival of London as well, an annual event, a month-long event at least, to give people a reason to be in London. And we need to get customers, we need to get footfall up in London. No matter what business you're in, London needs footfall. If you sell homes, if you lease offices, if you sell coffee, you need footfall in London, and I'll be driving that footfall up. And the last point I want to make before we go to questions is, it's important that you see me as London's champion. I will take on anyone to the benefit of London and its people, be that the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, or Sadiq Khan. London needs a fresh start. My name is Shaun Bailey. I'm the fresh start that London needs.
Great. Thank you, Shaun. Great to hear from you. I think you're absolutely spot on about getting to the Q&A as quickly as possible and spending most of our time on the Q&A. Our friends in our mailing list, there are some journalists from the Times and the Sunday Times and the Daily Mail, and I'm wondering if these anonymous attendees are questions coming from them, but we're welcoming all questions today. We've got some supporting remarks from Nick Candy next. Nick, why are you getting behind this campaign? And quite unusually, why are you stepping out to declare your support?
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Paul and Shaun. So I'm a Londoner. I was born in London some 48 years ago, and I love London, but the London we look at today is not the city that any of us recognise from 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. Crime is out of control, truly out of control, and I don't want to bring my family up here. I don't want to see my friends and my mum here, my grandparents. Like, everyone is going to be affected by crime. They already have, and it's completely random today. A 13-year-old boy that wants to join a gang is told, here's a knife, stab the first person you can see, and then you can join our gang. And that's happening all over London. I'll give you a frightening statistics, and which is more people have died from knife crime in London under the age of 30 in the pandemic than have died from the virus, when most of that time we've had a lockdown. So it's absolutely staggering, and it's random. It could be any one of us on this call. It doesn't really matter which political side you stand on. I'm very good friends with Tony Blair. I think he's a fantastic individual. I really like David Cameron. It doesn't matter whether you're red, blue, green, Liberal Democrats, and independent. It does not matter. All of us that have the same thing we want. We want London to be a great city, a city that we can make a home for us in, make money and be safe. It's the basic requirements of a human being. And Sadiq Khan has failed every single one of us on this call. He's lied to all of us. He's lied on his results. He's lied on his behavior. He blames everyone apart from himself. And that's why he would never even get into my office, because I would never employ someone that isn't willing to take responsibility. Okay, he's a disgrace to London, and he's really let down London, and he knows it. And at the beginning of this pandemic, when he blamed, he's the son of a bus driver, and he didn't provide PPE to our London transport workers. Everything he has done, whether it's on crime or housing or transport, has been a disgrace. And if you leave him in charge for another 3 years, Hammersmith Bridge won't be fixed, and whole parts of crime won't be fixed. And why haven't we got any police stations left? Shaun's got a plan to open 38 police stations for 8,000 officers on the beat, and open a youth centre in every single borough in London. Because if you're going to persuade criminals to come off the street, you've got to persuade them to do something else. Okay, so go to a youth centre, learn a skill, learn a hobby that you can make money from. Okay, Shaun has a plan. I only met him 18 months ago. I didn't know who he was. Okay, I've really become very fond of him. He's a fantastic human being. He spent 20 years of his life looking after, as a youth officer, stopping people going into crime. You know, it's very commendable what he's done as a human being. And so I believe he's the right guy for London at the right time. If we let crime continue to go out of control here, we will move out, all of us. We don't need to be here. Property values will fall drastically. Okay, and there's these Zoom calls that we all do 20 times a day, proving you don't need to be in central London to do anything. You can be somewhere else. You can be in a tax haven. You can be somewhere hot. You can be on holiday. You can be in the countryside. So the reason I've stepped up, because if you complain about something in life, yes, don't expect anything to change, yes, unless you're willing to do something yourself. So I've stepped up and put my head above the parapet because I really want London to change. We need 23 million tourists back here after the pandemic. We need London to change. We need London to be safer. You know, we need a great infrastructure, a transport system. How come Crossrail's not open? It's a disgrace, absolute disgrace. Yes, you know, how come we couldn't provide PPE for our transport workers? And again, an absolute disgrace. And if you live in Hammersmith or the other side of the Hammersmith Bridge, how the hell is one of the greatest cities, if not the greatest city in the world, got a bridge that doesn't work? And how do we get to that situation? And how's Transport for London gone bankrupt twice in 2020 and will go bankrupt in April this year again for the third time, less than a month before the election? Sadiq Khan has to go. Shaun Bailey's the right guy. And please ask him anything you want, because he's humble, he's honest, and he's a decent human being. He'll be a great mayor of London.
Thank you very much, Nick. Throwing some punches there. Might end up in the papers by the end of the night. I think I'd like to also reinforce what Nick was just saying. Then, personally, I don't mind which party's in charge, whether it's Labour or the Conservative Party. I'm much more interested in the particular leader. And one of the questions that's already come through here says a message for Shaun or Paul. How do you navigate the fact that despite all the PR, the Conservatives show themselves over and over through their policy to be a party for the rich? Well, I think as soon as we possibly can, we should speak about Shaun's origin story, because, I mean, Shaun, you're quite an unusual politician, especially an unusual Conservative. Would you like to explain to everybody where you've come from and how you started out in politics?
Yeah, of course. Look, I have spent most of my working life actually as a youth worker, and I did that work because I come from a poor community and I felt I had something to offer. I started my own charity. I also ran somebody else's charity as a chair of the trustees for many years as well, which was at the other end of the age range of 60 plus. The point is this: the idea that conservatism is only for rich people is something that members of the Labour Party peddle, because they are afraid of giving people freedom. They're afraid of people, you know, acknowledging the fact that people have agency. If you come from a poor community like mine, the single biggest spark to having a successful life is some kind of ambition. Now, you know, if you're ambition to be a plumber or ambition to be something, you have to have ambition. And that's why I'm a Conservative. And that's why I'll always tell you that conservatism is for everyone. And if you look what happened at the last general election and the one before that and the one before that, you know, we rejected the Labour Party because these old tropes don't mean anything. I remember London is a city of people who are trying to make ends meet. The best way to make ends meet in London is to work. And that's what I'm about. I'm about working people having an opportunity to do so. So when you hear me talk about business, remember, I'm so fond of business because it gives people employment. And the idea that, you know, on the left, you're for poor people, you can't be if you're not for business, because where are all us poor people going to work?
Thank you very much, Shaun. It's time for us to move on and invite Ben Mallet to share some data with us. I've just picked out a question which is very relevant to this. There's so many questions coming through, I can't keep up with them all. Shaun, it seems as though you're talking a lot of sense and your policies seem great. However, the polls appear to showcase that Sadiq is miles ahead, and it's almost impossible task for you to get elected. How are you going to overcome this? Well, to share the data with us is Ben Mallet, and let's take a look at what Ben's got to share with us.
Thank you so much, Matt. And yeah, perfect timing. To introduce myself, my name's Ben Mallet. I'm Shaun's campaign director. I have been in that post for about a year. I want to show some data, some research and polling we commissioned end of last year, just before Christmas, just to kind of show really what the campaign is focusing on and our pathway to victory. It's certainly the case that a lot of public polling seems to suggest that Khan has this in the bag. Public pollsters are notoriously bad at polling and predicting low turnout elections. It's very difficult in just a short script to identify someone's likelihood to vote, given that there's a social desirability bias to say that you will vote even if you don't plan on doing that. Private polling, longer scripts are easier to dig into to understand how people are going to vote and if they are going to vote, which is exactly why we use the pollsters that we do. So I'm just going to share my screen here, and
Make sure you can share your screen.
I'm pretty sure I can do that. If you give me 1 second.
Bit of a difficult campaign at the moment as well, because people aren't commuting to work every day. The readership amongst the newspapers, the numbers must be down. The lockdowns where you can't campaign doorstep to doorstep. All of this is sort of getting in the way a little bit. But tell us more, Ben.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. So let me just, Matt, can you see? Is that working? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Everyone else?
Yes, that's working. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and you're spot on. I mean, in a normal campaign, the Evening Standard, the Metro, would form the backbone of a comms effort to communicate with London voters. But when no one's on the tube or the train, that's much harder to do, as you might imagine. We therefore had to kind of be very imaginative, be very creative about talking directly to voters using voter comms and digital strategies, online ads, billboards, direct mail, which is the reality of COVID campaigning. But I'm just going to talk very briefly because I know that the focus is to go on to the Q&A. But in essence, as I said, we commissioned some polling, some longer form scripts using pollsters that correctly predicted the result in 2016, have done work on successful campaigns since then. I just want to kind of really point to our path to victory. The first is that despite that we did polling in June and November, or end of November, early December, despite the Conservative Party brand falling by 19% in that period, Shaun's brand increased, his favourability increased by 2%. And this just talks to something that we see in the focus groups. There is a real feeling among voters in London, the more they see Shaun, the more they like him. Soft Labour and Lib Dem voters love him. They see him as a breath of fresh air. They see him as refreshing, and they want to learn more about him. This is a really encouraging trend for us. It means that, frankly, the sort of driver of Shaun's vote is just going to be more people getting to see him, getting to know him, getting to hear from him. And this ability for him to defy gravity, seeing the, comparing favourability between party and candidate here, talks to Shaun's unique ability to do that. If we look at Sadiq Khan's, however, in the same period, he fell by 11%. He's now polling below zero favourability for the first time in his mayoralty. And although between June and November, the Conservative Party's vote share of the general election fell by 6%, the Conservative Party got 32% in the general election in 2019 and polling at 28% back in November. Despite that being the case, Shaun's vote share held steady. By end of November, early December last year, we were polling 44.56, which was higher than what we got in 2016, higher than Zach Goldsmith was able to get. And to be absolutely clear about this, that is exactly where Boris Johnson was polling against Ken Livingstone at the end of 2007, before he went on to beat Ken 53.47 in May 2008. Which again is quite encouraging. You look at Sadiq Khan's vote in a general election that Labour Party in London are on about 48%, or they were back in November, December last year. Then you ask the same people, how do you vote in a mayoral election? Only 43% say Labour. Then you name the candidates. You say Shaun Bailey, the Conservatives, Sadiq Khan, the Labour, and he falls even further, down to 40%, polling 8% below his party. By contrast, Shaun's polling 5% above the Conservative Party. And ask the killer question: does Sadiq Khan deserve re-election? Overwhelmingly, people think he doesn't. For only 44% think that he does deserve re-election. That's a fall of 7% since June. And crucially, there's a real feeling that Sadiq Khan's let people down in London, with only 44% of the people who voted for him in 2016, the people who made him mayor 5 years ago, finding it within themselves to disagree with the statement that Sadiq Khan's let me down, that even 29%, a third of that vote that made him mayor 5 years ago, agreeing with that statement. And a real feeling that Shaun Bailey would do a better job, +10, than Sadiq Khan. On the issues as well, you know, crime, transport, housing, there's a real feeling that Sadiq Khan has let London down. Massive deficits of dissatisfaction on knife crime, gang crime, policing crime, -45, -36, -30. And there's a feeling that Shaun would do a better job there, although, again, we can't take full advantage of that because at the time of this poll, and to a lesser extent now, Shaun's name ID was still too low. The same is true of transport, big deficits on congestion, on transport overcrowding, on managing TfL's finances, with a feeling that Shaun would do better jobs in these areas. And even housing, the area that traditionally Labour do very well on. Cost of renting a home, cost of buying a home. I'm sure you guys will remember that when Sadiq Khan launched his campaign 12 months ago, before the election was delayed, he stood up and this election is a referendum on rent control. If you vote for me, I will go to government and I will get the power to institute rent controls in London. It was his issue. It's the issue he kind of really nailed his re-election campaign on 12 months ago to that issue. And yet on this issue, -39, people are dissatisfied with him on the issue of cost of renting a home. Overwhelmingly, Londoners think London needs new leadership, +33, that's 54%. Our issue, our one challenge facing us is just Shaun's name ID. Our favourability is up. Of those who know Shaun, they like him, and increasingly that's the case. It's just that overwhelmingly people do not know enough about Shaun yet, or they certainly didn't in December. That's a problem, is growing smaller and smaller by the day, but it is still a problem. Why? Because any normal campaign would have the media attention, the London media attention. People would be on the trains and tubes reading the Evening Standard, the Metro, and that's just the case because of COVID. People are not as engaged in politics as they would be because of COVID. They're watching the news, but they're not watching the news with a view to learn about politics. They're watching the news to learn about COVID restrictions. And so we've had to cut through that with an aggressive Votercom's digital strategy, talking directly to voters, which has been a successful endeavour so far. We need to keep doing that. Our path to victory is simple but steep. And I think, you know, you talk to American consultants and they'd say name ID is a very easy problem to fix. You just got to run the ads. You know, you run them on TV in America. Obviously we can't do that in this country, but you run the ads, you run the leaflets, you run the digital ads, you run the billboards, and that problem disappears very quickly. London right now wants to drop Sadiq Khan. Every single one of these numbers I showed you proves that point. And this was November, December. Those problems have grown even bigger for him since then. They want to drop Sadiq Khan. They want change. They just don't yet know in what form that change can come, and that's our job, to show Londoners that Shaun Bailey is that change. And we know from these numbers that when people do see Shaun, they like him, they want him to be that change, they want to vote for him. That we've just got to get Shaun in front of them and offer him as that change. Final thing is, 50% of Londoners saying I don't know enough about Shaun Bailey to vote for him. This is our challenge. It's a problem, but it's an easy problem to fix. We had two problems at the beginning of this campaign. We fixed the harder problem. The harder problem was that people needed to be persuaded that Sadiq Khan needed to be replaced. We've won that argument. It's fair to say London no longer wants Sadiq Khan to be their mayor. But we need to win the argument that Shaun is the alternative. Hopefully that offers a bit of sort of flesh on the bone in terms of our campaign strategy and how we plan on campaigning over the next few months. It's a simple but steep path to victory. We've just got to get Shaun's name ID up there. To do that, we need to be running the ads, running the leaflets, etc. We can do that with your help. Thank you very much.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the free content. My name is Matt Siddell. I started Qandor in 2017. In 2020, we launched a property academy called Tropolis. If you want to know how you can come and join our fantastic network and work with the wonderful people that we help and support, then click the link below and book your call with me today.
Excellent. Thank you for that canter through the polling data, Ben. The next part of today's event is the Q&A with myself and Shaun Bailey and Nick Candy. There's lots of questions that have come in. We're only halfway through the event, so we can take plenty of time over this. If I may, Shaun, the first question that I'd like to kick off with is about your origin story. So 20 years ago, you and I were both actually living in Ladbroke Grove. You grew up in Ladbroke Grove. I just moved to the area, taking my first job in London. And a month after I took my first job in London, I actually got stabbed in the neighborhood. I was stabbed in the back of the head. I was stabbed in the face. But this was 20 years ago when it was kind of cool to get stabbed. These days, of course, it's not so cool. It's happening far too often. And I don't mean to make a joke of it. It was very serious. The guy who did it to me is still locked up. But these days, stabbings is just run of the mill. It seems that there's just knives everywhere in the city. Explain to people where you've come from, why you've got this perspective of crime, and what you're going to do about it.
Look, so to give you the short version, it's this. I come from a neighborhood that was full of gang crime, just full of crime in general. It was the norm. People being stabbed, people carrying weapons, and a lot of drug dealing. I became a youth worker because I wanted to be part of turning that around, because I truly do believe in my community. I believe that there's talent there. I believe that people want to do the right thing. And it only takes a small amount of people doing the wrong thing to have a big effect. So I wanted to help turn that around. And it was tough for me. I was raised by my single mom. My brother and I, we struggled financially really quite seriously. But, you know, my mum was generous and she worked hard on our behalf and pushed us forward. I was homeless for quite some time, so I sofa surfed. So in my early 20s, I was unemployed and homeless, and I sofa surfed for a long time. I managed to get a lot of temping work back in the days when you used to go up to the temping agency and wait outside, and someone would put you in the back of a van, and away you'd go and do some work. I did that for a little while. I signed on for a little while, and eventually I got back to college and went to university. And the only reason that story is relevant, because I want to demonstrate to Londoners your tough times can be changed if the political arena helps you, if you have some family behind you. And these are the kind of things that I want to get out across London. Because make no mistake, many Londoners do live in a tough position. And why crime is relevant, crime to a community is that corruption to a country. If your community is full of crime, it's really hard for you to have any kind of social mobility. I'll give you an example of this. I was in Croydon about 4 or 5 months ago, but maybe a bit more than actually. And I spoke to a young boy who's doing really well in school, and we talk about school and maybe university. But he said, of course, Shaun, I now spend more time on looking after my safety than pursuing my studies. And that broke my heart. And that's an example of how, if you live in an area with lots of crime, you can't move forward. And that's why this notion that the Conservative Party, which is often being called the party of law and order, is for rich people is ridiculous, because crime affects poor communities the most. It's poor communities that get attacked. It's poor communities whose children don't go anywhere. So when I speak about crime, I'll break it down to you very simply. We have to have a strong police presence. So that's 8,000 extra officers I'll put on the street. But we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. So it's 4,000 youth workers and 32 youth zones I'll put on our streets as well, to make sure our young people have a positive outlet and positive input as well. And that's important, because if you run a property business, even if it's high end, let's say you run a high end property business, or you run a housing association, you run RSL, both of you need the streets of London to be safe, for you to be of any use to the people you serve. Public safety in London is the single most important thing for us all, because we have our families here, we have our friends here. And if we want a London that's going to be prosperous, first thing is to make the streets safe.
Excellent. Thank you, Shaun. That answers John Steen's question. He says, as a dad of 3 kids, how are you going to make London safe from growing up? There are some other questions in here around crime. What are your plans to bring back the footfall that has deserted London?
So look, here's the big thing, isn't it? So all through lockdown, Sadiq has gleefully shut down London. 1 minute he said the tube's safe, then he said it wasn't. He wouldn't give bus drivers PPE, so they died at a rate 5 times that of NHS staff. And all of these things have made Londoners nervous about using the transport system. So the first thing is to build confidence about using the transport system. Show them that TfL are actually putting in the work and are cleaning that system. Show them how many infections have not happened on the system, the bus or the underground. Show them that TfL has the systems and the organisation to keep people safe. That's the first piece. The second piece is to go to employers and say, provide COVID-safe environments, the testing, ask your staff to get the vaccination, etc., and then ask them to come back into work. Because the first step is to get workers back into the middle of London. That buzz, that tipping point will mean that we can start to talk to tourists as well and say, if you live in the country, why don't you come and spend the day in London? And in order to do that, there's 2 or 3 things we can do. Firstly, I'll run a Festival of London just to get people excited about coming to London again and spending some time here. We'll look at subsidised travel. In the Olympic period, if people had tickets to an Olympic event, we'd give them lower cost travel in London, so they'd come to London earlier, stay in London the whole day, spend some money, get some footfall back in London. one of the worst things happening in London is that we are in the lowest 5% of footfall and spend for high streets across the country. That is not sustainable. We need a good entertainment and hospitality experience, a good shopping experience, because that means all properties become more valuable. People want to be in London, people want to have fun here, and it makes London an attractive place to be.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Mimi Patel. Ronnie Wally has asked, how can you open more police stations and get more police officers when the current regime is cutting it back? Who will fund it?
So we have the money. That's an excellent question, and it's right to ask where the money comes from. I applaud that. We have the money coming for the police stations in Mayoral, so it's there, it's already there. It will cost about 50 million. There's 50 million there, and it'll cost 8 million to open these stations. Because in many cases, we still have the building. In about 34 of the cases, the building is still there. It's the front counter that's closed. And why I want to open it is for two reasons. One, the buildings look derelict and it sends the wrong message. If you're a criminal, it looks like the police are in retreat, that they're hiding. And two, with the rise in crime in London, residents want to speak directly to a police officer. If you've been robbed, mugged, or like I had recently, your car stolen, the last thing you want to do is fill in a form on the internet. You want to speak to a human being. And if we want to make London safe, there's an impression that the police want to change, and that's invisibility. We need a very visible police force. I think this is the way of doing that, opening those stations. The buildings are still there, the money's in the budget, and I'll get it done as soon as I can.
Excellent. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you, Ronnie, for that great question. An interesting point came up last month when we were talking, because the Mayor of London is in charge of the budget for crime, for fighting crime, for the police. It's not the government, it's the Mayor of London. Am I right?
The Mayor of London is the police commissioner for London. He has complete and total budgetary control. For instance, if we're to believe Sadiq Khan is so focused on public safety, he has two questions to answer. One, why did he, as one of his first acts of Mayor of London, remove £38 million from the police staffing budget? What that meant was we were always understaffed for police activity in London because he removed the money almost immediately. And secondly, why did it say it'll take 10 years to solve life crime in London? We don't have 10 years. People are dying on our streets right now, today.
Okay, we've got so many questions to get through. Let's see if we can rattle off a couple of transport questions. This question from Gregory James. What does a measured approach to clean air and low road congestion look like?
So how we get low road congestion is to give people an alternative to owning their own private car. So people have to have good public transport. That's why you'll hear me talking about keeping the network in its entirety, even through the COVID period. That network needs to be run. So you hear me talking about a London infrastructure bank to provide TfL with the money to run those systems and develop those systems as well. We need more car clubs in London. For every one car in the car club, it takes 13 private cars off the roads. And that's important because we want to lower the emissions from unnecessary travel. We need to do more nighttime deliveries as well, because once we swap to electric and hydrogen vehicles, which are quieter, it means we can use our road network more efficiently, again, reducing the traffic in London. And the other piece I'd say, I want to green the entire bus fleet by 2025. So make sure that all new buses bought are zero emissions, because that will be the equivalent to removing 1.1 million cars from an emissions point of view from the streets of London. And that's very different. It's in stark contrast to Sadiq Khan, who's charging people more to pollute. But that doesn't mean there's less pollution. It just means Londoners pay more to live in London.
We've had a great opportunity to get loads of roadworks done over the last 12 months. I'm sure that when all the city opens up again, all the roadworks will all be done and all the roads will be open, or maybe
Unfortunately,
not.
That's not true. They're going to probably spend the time undoing the very inappropriate low traffic neighbourhoods they've put in and some of the cycle lanes. There isn't enough balance here. I like the idea of cycle lanes and low traffic neighbourhoods, but there has to be some balance. We have to let vehicles move around because the commercial existence of London needs that road traffic.
Okay, well, this comes straight into this question here from an anonymous attendee. What do you feel about all these new bike lanes and cutting off the roads? Have these been a great waste of money and delay in car travel? Okay, this is a bit of a delicate one.
Modal change in London is a great idea. We do need to have less traffic on the roads in London, but there's steps. So firstly, we get unnecessary private ownership down and those journeys down as well. Some of these LTNs have added to the traffic, not relieved the traffic. They've been pushed on local people who didn't want them, who pointed out all the problems and they weren't listened to. I ran a petition many months ago to have such such LTNs removed and to have a stop, a moratorium on any more. I'm on record of saying we need proper consultation. We only put them in when most local people want them and in appropriate places. And the same for cycle lanes. Cycle lanes have largely been good for London, but they've gone too far with some of the new ones they've put in. And that's because Sadiq Khan took an opportunity to sneak them in. If you have a cycle lane that is inappropriate, we need to have a look at it. And before anybody from the cycle lobby attacks me, look at the cycle lane that was put on Euston Road. Why that is not useful, because it means it starts a fight between them and us, between drivers and cyclists. And it doesn't need to be that way. We just need better planning and better balance as to where we put cycle lanes and as to how we administer the roads in London. I'm a true believer that we can lower and should lower the amount of traffic in London, but we need a different plan to the one Sadiq Khan is carrying out, which is very piecemeal and doesn't have an overall strategic goal.
Okay, it looks like a journalist has slipped a question in here, so we need to tread carefully now. It's for an anonymous attendee again. Question for Nick, if he's there, he might be on his phone. Would you ever consider advising Shaun on property or crime, etc., if he did get in? Someone's taken an interest or curious as to why you're so involved.
Listen, if Shaun gets in, I think he's already spoken to lots of potential deputy mayors. What I like about Shaun is that he will do the politics, and the deputy mayors, he will get people that are accomplished in business in that sector, whether it's in health, whether it's in late night czar, whether it's in hospitality and leisure, whether it's in real estate. For me in real estate, I wouldn't take a position because I've got too many other things going across the world in lots of different industries. But I'm here to help in any way I can. I love London. I think London's the greatest city in the world. You know, I started in London with £6,000 in 1995, 6,000, and I managed to make myself a great life here. And I want the people back when I was 21, 22 to have the same hope and aspirations, and also that London gives them that opportunity. Because if you don't have hope and opportunity, what is there that, you know, for London? We've got to give every Londoner, young Londoner, that hope, that aspiration, that inspiration to do well here. And I think you're seeing today two of the greatest cities in the world, both New York and London, both have got horrendous mayors. Bill de Blasio has destroyed New York single-handedly. Luckily, he will go in November this year because his 2 terms will be up. Sadiq Khan's had 4 years already. He's had an extra year free of charge. So the next mayor of London will only have 3 years in their first term, or his last term if he wins. But I think he's destroyed our city. And I think the sooner we can get rid of him, the better. And if anyone thinks he's done a good job on transport or crime or infrastructure or environmental, please tell me, because I can't see one thing he's done well, and I just don't recognize it as the city we used to know. So I'm always here to help. You know, I've helped numerous different governments in different ways. When Sir Paul Stevenson was head of the Met Police in London, I sat on the Safer London Foundation board, and I love London, and we've got to give London a chance to revive and have a fresh start after this pandemic is over. And I believe that fresh start is anyone apart from Sadiq Khan.
Yeah, I'm getting the distinct impression you're not a fan of Sadiq Khan.
Definitely not a fan of Sadiq Khan, and I'm not ashamed of saying it because, you know, he blames every single person apart from himself. Just that road question that you just asked. You know, we've got almost every bridge you can't get over before the pandemic because because of all the roadworks everywhere, and he blames the local councils. Does he take responsibility for anything? I don't know how he even looks himself in the mirror in the morning. He should be ashamed of what he's done to our great city.
There's one more question here, Nick. It says, would you be motivated to change direction from business into politics, or is this just a temporary sort of thing?
No, I love business. I like business. You know, I'm interested in politics from the sides. You know, it's not something I'm going to go into as a job or a role. It's you know, where I think I can help and where I think I can change things. You know, I will do all I can to. And you know, on this in London is about crime. This is the crime election. None of us, and I'm sorry to hear your story 20 years ago, Matthew, none of us want to have crime like this. It doesn't matter which political side you stand on. It really doesn't. It's irrelevant where you are, who you are. It's not just poor communities that are getting affected. It's not middle class communities. It's not upper class communities. It's everyone's being affected by crime, and it's completely random. And it will stop people coming to our great city. Why would you, if you've got a son or daughter in Hong Kong or China or the Middle East today, or even America, why would you send your kids to London with knife crime out of control as it is? And we have to do something about it, because I'm telling you, we're on the verge of no return. You know, and Sadiq Khan has put us in that position.
I think you know, it wouldn't make any difference to me if Shaun was a Labour politician or a Conservative politician, which he obviously is. I think as an individual, he really can bridge and reach and speak to many corners of society, and it does make him a credible leader. So I can see why you're getting behind him, and frankly, that's what inspired me to support him as well. Another question here, I think this one's for Shaun. What specific things would you do differently from Sadiq Khan, and have you costed these ideas?
Again, another great question. Let's be clear. Anything I say has been costed. You know, I'm not like a dyed-in-the-wool politician. I'm not a Tory. Like, I don't care about the party politics of all. I want to make impact for people who have to work for a living. So that means any policy I come with is costed 100%. And if you ask me what I'll do differently from Sadiq Khan, the first thing I'll say is take responsibility. I think Londoners would appreciate someone who said, look, knife crime's out of control. I'm trying my best here. I've got a new plan to do this, or I'll try to do this, or I'll take responsibility for that, rather than saying it's the government's fault. It's rising all over the country. It's not me, Gov. That gives carte blanche to criminals to do what they want to do, because they don't think anybody's fronting them up. Same with housing. If you see the very disingenuous way he talks about his housing targets, it's unbelievable. In his manifesto, he promised 80,000 houses. Then he scrubbed it out and said he promised 56,000 houses. It doesn't matter, because he hasn't done half of either of those figures. But he keeps talking about starts. And all the property developers and all the people in housing on this call will realise nobody can live in a start. You know, what a start means you've given permission. What Londoners are interested in is finishes. Where are these actual homes? He's built almost nothing in a 5-year period. We've lost 5 years of homes in London. So if you're on this call and you're dyed-in-the-wool lefty, right, and you're focused on things like I would be focused on, like homelessness or unemployment, ask yourself, really, has Sadiq Khan done anything for them? He has not, and you know that. And also, developing all these false fights with the government just means London doesn't get a good deal. He could do more for London. And let's be clear, I'll take a good idea from anywhere. I don't care where it comes from. He could do more. And the reason I tell you that, because a story I'll tell you, in the very beginning, we all asked Sadiq Khan, look, crime in London is serious, have a look at it. I told him about a violence reduction unit. He poo-pooed the idea. I told him, why don't we look at treating crime in London as a public health idea? He poo-pooed that as well. Then 12 months later, he's talking about it as if he invented it, which I just thought, okay, fine, I get that you want to do that, but you should have done that a year ago. We've lost a record amount of children in that time, and you could have saved those children by making a stance earlier on. And it's tactics like that that mean that London suffers, and I just want to turn that around.
Okay, well, it's clear that we're taking a few swings at Sadiq Khan here, and this election is going to start heating up a little bit now because it's less than 2 months away. What dirt are they going to sling at you, and what could we expect to see come up in the papers over the next 6-7 weeks?
They'll do all what they've always done. They're trying to paint me as a typical Tory. They don't know how to fight someone who's actually concerned about the issues. So anything I've ever said, I've read things that I supposedly said 20 years ago when they're telling me off about them. And I'll say to anybody who's listening, it just shows you what ivory tower Sadiq Khan's been hidden in. I've always had to ask myself the tough questions. When I was a youth worker on the street trying to persuade people not to join the local gang, and they were laughing at me, I had to ask them tough questions. Now, I remember telling a kid, right, I've been in the job centre and had gotten these leaflets about being a bus driver. So I was walking around trying to get people to become a bus driver. And he said, Shaun, are you kidding? I make $2,000 a week, and you're asking me if I want to be a bus driver. And I remember me and this kid having a real conversation about, well, bus drivers live well into their 80s. How long are you going to live? You know, and people didn't like having those conversations, but those got, to me, were the conversations that saved lives. I remember going to a Common Select Committee and giving evidence, and then, 15 years later, reading it taken out of context in The Guardian. The point being this, whenever you read that one-sided stuff, it just shows you they're afraid of a real conversation in politics. What I want to do is talk to Sadiq Khan about his record. And I know if you're sat here and you're neutral, so we're taking all these swipes at Sadiq Khan, I will debate with Sadiq Khan any time he wants to, day or night, morning, down, night, I'll do it, because I want him to answer the same questions that he keeps telling me off for answering.
Okay, well, we better get through a few more questions before Nick's going to do the closing comments. Shaun, how will you approach culture? We see Sadiq's landmark commission. I fear London's history is being rewritten.
again, this is one of the things I'm on record for. I simply would just stop the Landmarks Commission. And the reason I do it as well is because Sadiq Khan jumped on a bandwagon and he talked about tearing statues down. If you're going to rewrite the cultural existence of London, what you really should be doing is adding people to it. Sadiq Khan demonstrated that he's a divisive politician and always has been. If you hear me talking about culture, it'll only be in two ways. One, how do we get more of it in London so we can develop a much more exciting cosmopolitan city that people want to visit for all of the, financial and social benefits that will give us? Or how do we add more people to it? As a Black Londoner, I know there's been many, instrumental Black people in the development of London, many women as well, many Indian people, many people from the sort of diasporas that are big in here, anything from Polish to Nigerian. I would just be looking to add them to our history, not rewrite our history. Because the point is this: if you think you help poor people, or Black people in particular, by removing the parts of history that are tough, you don't. How are my children going to learn about stuff if you've eradicated that person from history? And we can't just judge yesteryear by the values we have today. Of course, a society evolves. Of course, society refines itself. So we look back and they look rough to us, but that's because we're 50, 60, 200 years on. So for me, the commission would go, and I would replace it with something that celebrated our future, didn't look at our past. Fair enough.
One more question here for Nick. What changes would you like Shaun to make on day one in the job?
I think, as spoken about earlier, I think the number one change on day one is crime. This is a crime election. It's as simple as that. We can talk about transport and all those other things, but everything starts with crime. Tourists come into London, people feel comfortable to live in London and move around in London. And so the 8,000 police officers opening up the best part of, I think it was 40 or 50 police stations, and opening up a youth centre at every borough in London. And Shaun's been working with John Roberts from Onside for over a year now on this. And John Roberts has had a huge success with Onside, which is effectively opening youth centres in every boroughs across the UK. Because if you want people to get out of crime, you've got to give them something else to do. The other thing is we've got to sort out the punishment for crime. Now that can't be done by Shaun, that will have to be done by central government. But Shaun's got a great relationship with central government. Boris, all the senior cabinet ministers, everyone's super supportive of Shaun. His backstory shows that he's in the right place to sort out crime. It starts with crime. Okay, obviously we need our leisure and hospitality, all hospitality opened up. We need our transport working correctly. I'd love to see Crossrail open. There's probably quite a few property guys on this call that bought places and homes and real estate around Crossrail across London, and is waiting for it to open so the property prices can go up. Shaun wants people to make money as well. You come to a city like London or New York or Hong Kong because you want to make money. It's not a bad thing to make money. It's not a bad expression. It's like, I think all of us on this call would like to make money. Yes, and London needs to thrive on that. But we have to start it with crime. If we get crime under control, we would have made a massive step in the right direction. And I just want to finish with, there's a misconception that Sadiq's not responsible for the policing and stuff. The Home Secretary gives him the money. So Priti Patel gives him the money. I think Sadiq has about a budget of about 18 billion a year. Okay, pounds that is, 18 billion pounds. And he blames again everyone apart from himself. The Met Police Commissioner, Cressida, she reports to Sadiq. Yes, so if he wanted to do something on policing and crime, he could have done it. So to answer your question, crime is number one. This is the crime election.
Definitely feels like there's plenty of potential for improvement, room for improvement when it comes to crime in London these days. I'm going to move towards the end of the event. I've got a couple of last questions just to squeeze out here. Shaun White says, Shaun, if you were debating directly with Khan, you would beat him hands down, but Londoners don't tend to vote for Tories. Why are you standing under that banner?
There's two things. First is a personal thing, right? Nobody's ever given me nothing in life. I've had to work at it. I have to keep going at it. And I will do everything in my power to give Londoners an alternative. And I believe Londoners are ready for an alternative. The figures have shown you that. Ask how many people do they think London is going in the right or wrong direction, to see what kind of answers you get there. And let me add some things to that. That's why you hear me talk about 100,000 homes for £100,000. I want to give Londoners a stake in London. And why is that important? Because London is a place full of ambitious people, and they're ambitious for their families, and they realise being able to buy their own property is better than having to rent the whole time. And that's not my opinion. 87% of Londoners want to own. I want to help them achieve that dream. We talk about TfL. We need TfL to work no matter what business you run. Let's be clear. London has the biggest high quality, highly educated work population in the world, but that's because we can move around. So if you want to start a property business in Harrow, you can employ people from way into Kent because they can get to you easily. I need to make sure that can keep happening. We talk about how London is a factory, where people make money, but it's also home to 9 million people. That's why you hear me talk about not building on the green belt, but opening it up so people can use it. Somewhere to go on the weekend, stroll with a dog, with the kids, the wife, whatever keeps you going. And the other thing that's important to me as well is about public health in London. I used to sit on the board of a hospital, and I've always thought we could make people healthier in London. And the reason I give you this broad spread of topics is because that's what London is interested in. The idea that Londoners always vote Labour simply isn't true. Londoners need an alternative. I want to give them an alternative so they can vote somewhere else. Remember, my life has been a story of not really being hard on the left or hard on the right. I don't do party politics. Yes, I'm a Conservative because I believe in Conservative values, but really I do London. I want to see people succeed. This is about impact. This isn't about the Tory party, because I tell you something now, if I'm Mayor of London, myself and the Chancellor will be having a lot of tough conversations, not least about VAT relief for tourist shoppers. They need that VAT relief, not least asking for more money to run TfL and all other things. This is about getting a Londoner to run London for the benefit of other Londoners, not for the benefit of their career.
Well, you're touching on so many things there. As soon as you start mentioning VAT relief, it's triggering questions about business rates and all sorts. And to be totally honest with you, I've been overwhelmed with the questions that have come through over the last hour. I've been trying to keep up with them. My head is spinning. But we
just to say on VAT relief, on VAT relief and on business rates, yes, let's just say the Chancellor and I have had a lot of sharp exchanges about that. And the only reason I bring that up is because I used to be special advisor to David Cameron. I know how government works. I know how to get a good deal for London. And that's why I'm building those relationships now, because London has a lot of asks and we won't get them under Sadiq Khan, because not only do the government not trust him, but neither do the civil service as well. They need someone that they can bargain with, that they can trust. And that is why I'm really raring to go and represent London in those conversations, so that we can make sure the city gets what it needs, business in London gets what it needs, and the people of London get what they need as well.
There was one question I wanted to get to because it touches on race. It's buried up far too high up the questions for me to dig it out. But what's your attitude towards race? Because obviously, if you do win the election, you'd be the first Black mayor of London, not the first Black mayor in London, because I think there was a Black mayor in Battersea 60 odd years ago, if I'm right. But what are your views on race? You don't tend to talk about it very much.
My views on race are this. One of the best things about being in London, you can just be who you are: black, white, green, mauve, purple, green. You are who you are. And that's one of the things I really love about London. Race for me is, of course, important, because I want to show that London is so open, so cosmopolitan, that you can come from a black background. My parents are Jamaican, I was born in Paddington, but you can be black in a way that we Londoners would consider someone black and be mayor of London. I think that's really powerful. For my own community, we've had lots of struggles to be treated equally, and I think this symbolism says something as well. What I won't do with race is use it to embarrass people, is use it to tell people, you're racist because you're not me, you haven't voted for me. No, that's not what it's about. Race should be seen in London as a positive, not a guilt payment. Remember, 45% of London's population is non-white, but that gives us an advantage because we have links to people all over the world. To have, but I'm prepared to do it because I feel like once we've nailed that conversation, we can move on and just be even more successful as a society and as a city.
Awesome. We need to move towards the end of the event. There's a couple of important announcements, so don't leave us just yet. We've held quite a large number of people's attention for the past hour. As I said, it has been quite overwhelming at times, and my head is spinning. This question really sets out perfectly, probably for you to do the closing comments, Nick. It's from Chris Howarth. He says, what can we all do to help Shaun raise his name recognition? And greetings from all Tories in Surrey.
So I think, first of all, the election's winnable for Shaun. The odds wouldn't state that, but I'd go and have a bet because I believe that on May the 7th, Shaun Bailey will be our next Mayor of London. How do we get him across the finish line? We get him across the finish line by raising his face in name ID. Sadiq Khan is loving this election in the sense that he thinks that it's a COVID election, people won't come out. But let me give you the numbers. There's 9 million people in London. 5 million are eligible to vote. And on the last election, which was Zach versus Sadiq, 47% of the population voted. So under 2.5 million people. It's probably like, because we're in the middle of COVID and the pandemic still, even though the vaccine rollout's going well, I think, a low turnout election is probably more likely. So, it's probably going to be 2.2 to 2.4 million people that will vote. We'll need 1.1 million people to get, 1.3 million people to probably get Shaun across the line. And it's all about face and name ID. So Shaun, you'll see going, over the next few weeks, we've got lots of things lined up to help Shaun in the newspapers. And there's lots of national newspapers that are already very supportive of Shaun. They realise that Sadiq has been a complete disgrace to this city. And it doesn't matter, as I said earlier, it doesn't matter whether you're a Labour supporter, a Tory supporter, a Liberal Democrat, a Green, Independent, it is irrelevant. Yes, if you're happy with London, how it is, with the transport mess and with the crime mess, go out and vote for Sadiq. Yes, but if you're not happy and you want to make change, every one of us has the ability to make change. Okay, we do it in our day life every day with our families and our work. Yes. And we can do it again. Let's take it back to control of our great city and not do what New York did by giving the terrible Bill de Blasio a second term. Let's not give the terrible Sadiq Khan another second term. And the reason Sadiq also would love a second term because the next term will collide with the general election. And if Keir Starmer doesn't win, Sadiq wants the top job at the Labour Party. But based on his performance today, he deserves nothing. He deserves to get kicked out on May the 6th and Shaun Bailey should be appointed. How do we do that? Face and name ID. Obviously, that requires donations. I've led the way on doing donations by donating myself because my parents always said, you've got to lead by example. So hopefully I've led by example by, donating early to the campaign and helping the campaign. But I'm super impressed with Shaun Bailey. I hope you guys have been today. I thank you for your time. And, Matthew's got my email and mobile and, I think it was about 165 people on the call, but, I'm happy for my email to be shared, Matthew, and if anyone wants to speak about it, I'm passionate about London. I love London. It's been great to me and my family. And I want to make sure it's great when we come out of the pandemic.
There may be one or two other people on the call as well who could help if they are able to gather an audience. For instance, I noticed quite a few people who've got quite large social media followings who are joining the call today. Yes, Shaun.
Matthew, I'd say spread the word, speak to people about me, look at my tweets, look at the videos I'm sending about, forward them on, get the conversation going, let Londoners know I exist. That's how we win this. Sadiq Khan has been careful to never mention my name. Why don't we mention my name everywhere? If someone asks you what the time is, say it's 4 o'clock in Shaun Bailey's London. That's what we need to do. We need to get the message out there. We need to let people know there is an alternative. And I'm serious about this thing. This isn't about party politics for me. This is about impact. So if you listen to this now in your neighbourhood, good, great. I understand where you're coming from, but ask yourself seriously, can we continue to take London in this direction? And the answer is definitely no. And I'm the only person who has a real plan to take it in a different direction. London needs a fresh start. Shaun Bailey is that fresh start.
London definitely does need new leadership, and you're absolutely right. I think Sadiq Khan is pushing to extend the lockdown because then you can't campaign door to door, and no one's going to read any newspapers on a tube or anything like that. But you've got the bit between your teeth, and you've got my support as well. And Nick, I hope you haven't said anything that's going to get us in the papers, but I've got a nasty feeling that we might end up.
No problems. I'll be there for other reasons as well. Hopefully some business reasons.
All right. Well, look, I I better just wrap up. If you're interested in if you've got some way in which you think you can support this campaign, here's the email address for you to send your suggestion through. That email address is actively managed, and someone will respond to you. If you think that you could invite Shaun onto some sort of webinar or a show with a decent sized audience, then please contact the guys through the link. I think there were one or two other suggestions in here. Yes, if you're interested in joining the club, then just go to the website and have a look at the club. And if you want to join us for our next webinar, it's on the 17th of March, 2 till 3, talking about how your pensions can be fit for property. After those announcements, all that's left for me to do is just to say thank you to our guests. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Ben and to Nick, and of course, thank you to Shaun, and good luck, Shaun. Go and give them help.
Just one thing, there's going to be some live debates as well with Shaun and Sadiq. But for the press on the line, Sadiq's run out of the first one is hiding. So he's refused to turn up for the first one. And that is how scared he is of Shaun Bailey. Shaun Bailey will be the next Mayor of London. I'll put money on it, and I'll put a lot of money on it. Okay, because the average Londoner is an honest, decent Londoner. 99.9% of people are good people. They're not rapists, murderers, and stabbers. Yes, they're good people, and we want to reclaim our city. We reclaim our city by giving the keys to Shaun Bailey.
Well, if Sadiq Khan was hiding, I think you might have called him out. What did you say earlier on? You wouldn't get a job in your office.
Because he takes no responsibility for anything. He blames everyone apart from himself. In my office, ultimately, everything rests, sooner or later it comes on my desk, I take responsibility. We all make mistakes, but he takes no blame for anything and no responsibility. And the sooner he goes, the better.
All right, let's keep an eye on the newspapers later on. And good luck, chaps. Good luck with the campaign. This is the awkward bit of the webinar, because what I'd really like to do is just wrap things up with you guys. But the only way to finish the campaign is just to press the leave button and everyone goes. So,
well, let me say bye to everyone. Thank you for giving me your time. I really appreciate it. London is the best city in the world. We can make the change to put London on the best footing in the world. Join me in giving London a fresh start. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
So if you enjoyed this video, why not check out some of our other videos? I recently interviewed lots of fantastic people. There's loads of good content in there. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next video.